Back in high school, Chelsea was courted by a boy named James Moore. Despite the fact that his courtship looked rather ridiculous, the boy was in love and sincerely believed that one day Chelsea would become his wife. Trying to make her happy, James brought her sweets in the school cafeteria and carried her backpack. Sometimes the boy picked up flowers from the flower bed near the city hall, and getting over his shyness, gave them to Chelsea. After finishing school, the young people stayed in touch, but it was more like an ordinary friendship than something more serious. More often than not, Chelsea didn't take James's advances seriously and treated them as something ordinary and unchanging. Time passed, and the young people still remained friends. In the depths of his soul, James was very upset that Chelsea didn't see their relationship as something serious. The young man deliberately didn't rush things, sincerely hoping that Chelsea would realize that he had feelings for her and would eventually choose him as her life partner. But what happened next changed the situation completely. It all started with the fact that Chelsea met a young man from a wealthy family at one of the student parties. Brandon Davis grew up surrounded by luxury and wealth, and therefore, having reached the age of majority, he was used to spending money left and right. Having met Chelsea, the young womanizer immediately took the bull by the horns and started courting her the way only a very rich man could afford. Flowers and expensive gifts succeeded each other in an endless whirlpool of luxury, which dazzled Chelsea, who grew up in a poor family. Of course, James tried to compete with the son of a wealthy oilman, but all of his timid attempts only made everyone laugh at him. The young man grew up without a father and had to learn the values of money and family way too early in life. James's mother worked as a cleaner at a roadside motel and couldn't provide her son with everything he needed. For this very reason, the young man couldn't really compete with Brandon, who could afford to spend an average salary of a janitor or a post office worker on just one dinner at a restaurant. But the most upsetting for James was that Chelsea quickly stepped over the very line that she so carefully avoided in their relationship. The young man literally idolized his beloved and was ready to carry her in his arms, but Brandon treated her as just another woman who fell for his charm. As expected, the nights full of passion and love didn't last forever. The news of Chelsea's pregnancy had the effect of an icy shower on the young couple. How could it have happened? I don't want to have children yet. My father is preparing a position for me at his company, Brandon drawled with displeasure. But honey, it's our baby, ours, and no one else's, Chelsea objected. Unfortunately, Brandon wasn't the least bit interested in becoming a father. But on the other hand, he didn't want to look bad in the eyes of his girlfriend. Brandon wasn't sure whether he actually loved Chelsea or not. Most likely, it was just a fleeting infatuation and physical attraction that often arises between two beautiful people. Having finally realized that under no circumstances would Chelsea go for an abortion, Brandon decided that they should get married. It was a very difficult decision for him. He definitely didn't rush into it and tried to think through all the options first. The day Brandon proposed to Chelsea was the sweetest moment of her life. Unfortunately, the woman was so caught up in the excitement that she didn't realize that Brandon was forced to take this step. The young man wanted to save his reputation, which he knew would suffer if he chose to break off things with his pregnant girlfriend. It took about a month to plan the wedding. Brandon's parents spared no effort or money on it. At first, Chelsea didn't want to invite James to the wedding, since he took it as a real betrayal. But then, having tried to see the situation from his point of view, she changed her mind and did send out an invitation to her childhood friend. Deep down, Chelsea didn't believe that James would come to the restaurant where the ceremony was to take place. In any case, most of the guests were invited by the rich groom, and the chances that the young man from a poor family would decide to attend the wedding were slim to none. On the day of the wedding, about half of the city gathered at the restaurant. There seemed to be no end to those who wanted to see the newlyweds. Therefore, no one paid attention to the young man in a cheap suit who came to the restaurant in the midst of the celebration. Having given the bride a bouquet of roses, James came onto the stage and asked for a microphone. That moment was the first time in her life that Chelsea felt bad that she had rejected James's advances and treated them without due attention all this time. But it was too late to think about it now. Therefore, all that Chelsea could do now was tearfully watch James take the microphone and sing a song from their childhood. The young man's performance was so beautiful and emotional that everyone went silent. Most of the guests didn't even know that the stranger standing on the stage was in love with the bride, whom he had known since high school. Having finished the song, James offered his best wishes to the young couple and went for the exit. Chelsea's first instinct was to catch up with him and ask for forgiveness. But then she saw Brandon's satisfied expression and decided to abandon this idea. The rest of the night was uneventful and rather ordinary, which left the bride feeling a bit sad. Meanwhile, James decided to take a shortcut and walk home along the highway. His face was burning red and tears were flowing down his cheeks, but they didn't bring him any relief. After the wedding, Brandon's attitude towards Chelsea changed dramatically. The rich husband considered his duty fulfilled, and the fact that his wife was suffering from morning sickness and dizziness didn't seem to bother him at all. James started staying late at work, returning home well past midnight. Moreover, he often smelled of women's perfume and had lipstick stains on his shirt. "Honey, why are you being like that? We're husband and wife after all. When was the last time we spent an evening together?" Chelsea asked without hiding her indignation. But it was hard to make Brandon feel any remorse, since he considered himself right in everything. "If there's something you don't like, feel free to leave. You can pack up your stuff and get out of here at any time," Brandon answered, sounding way too mean. This went on for about a month, after which something happened that turned Chelsea's life upside down. On that ill-fated day, the woman went to the hospital for a checkup at the gynecology department. Everything went so well that Chelsea decided to change her plans and go home instead of shopping. The woman could have hardly suspected what she would see in just a few minutes. Having opened the door, Chelsea immediately noticed a pair of women's shoes standing in the hallway. "Honey, are you home? Why didn't you tell me that you were having company over?" the woman asked timidly. Since the question remained unanswered, Chelsea took a few steps towards the bedroom, where some very unambiguous sounds were coming from. And when the woman opened the door, she almost fainted from everything she saw. Chelsea's shock was explained by the fact that Brandon was naked in bed with some blonde woman. "What's going on here, Brandon? What do you think you're doing?" Chelsea exclaimed, trying to get a hold of herself. But the rich businessman wasn't about to apologize or try to justify himself to his wife, whom he had loved for a long time. Instead, he warily closed his eyes and rolled over to the other side. Having witnessed her husband's betrayal, Chelsea started feeling unwell. The woman hugged her belly and slowly sank to the floor. Everything went dark in her eyes, and her lower abdomen started aching unbearably. Chelsea could barely remember what happened next. Despite the fact that Brandon got really scared and called the ambulance almost immediately, the doctors couldn't save his wife's pregnancy. Chelsea spent about 2 weeks in the hospital before she could be safely discharged. Having cut off all ties with her cheating husband, the woman returned to her parents' house. The worst part was that Chelsea couldn't get over losing her baby. It took the young woman about 6 months to get at least somewhat better. During all this time, Brandon never once came to visit her. Moreover, he didn't even bother calling to check up on her. It was at this turning point that Chelsea thought of James, whose feelings she had always disregarded. The thought of the man who loved her with every cell of his body settled in Chelsea's brain like a splinter. What if I paid James a visit? I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. We're not enemies after all, Chelsea thought. The woman chose a nice sunny day for her visit. She knew that James lived with his mother and was sure that they would both be glad to see her. But when the woman approached James's house, she saw something that made her heart sink. A young man in a wheelchair was moving around the yard, carefully going around the flower beds. Tears filled Chelsea's eyes as she realized that it was James. Seeing the guest, the disabled man stopped the wheelchair and looked away. Then, having gathered his courage, James wheeled closer and said, "See what I've become? You were right to choose Brandon over me. He's rich, and I'm just a loser." Chelsea sighed sadly and shook her head in response. Realizing that they needed to have a long and difficult conversation, the woman helped James get back inside the house. There, over a cup of tea, the man told Chelsea about how he got hit by a car on her wedding day. "I was walking by the road, deep in my thoughts. All I remember is a strong blow and a lot of pain," James added, lowering his eyes. As it turned out, getting hit by a car caused the man to suffer a spinal injury, which put him in a wheelchair. According to the doctors, James had a very good chance of recovery, but for that, he needed to take his meds regularly and to do physical therapy. The problem was that after Chelsea's wedding, the man simply gave up and completely refused to follow the doctor's recommendations. Instead, he spent hours wheeling around the yard in his wheelchair, looking sadly at the people passing by. Having heard James's story, Chelsea got quiet for a bit, thinking it all over. Realizing that James couldn't handle the situation on his own, the woman decided to help him. To begin with, Chelsea started coming over every morning to make sure James did his physical therapy. At first, James didn't believe that it would give any results, but the woman was unshakable in her desire to help her childhood friend get back on his feet. After about 6 months of intensive PT, the young man could already move around on crutches, and 2 months later, he took his first independent steps with a cane. All this time, Chelsea stayed by his side and slowly but surely led him to recovery. It took about 1.5 years for James to be able to move without the help of crutches or a wheelchair. During this time, Chelsea reconsidered her attitude towards her childhood friend and realized that she was actually in love with him. Those were strong and sincere feelings that were nothing like what she'd experienced with Brandon. 6 months later, Chelsea and James held a small wedding ceremony that tied their lives together. People around the city saw the story of the young couple as a sort of a miracle, but little did they know that the real miracle was still underway. The news that Chelsea was pregnant with twins was the best news not only for James, but for everyone who knew this young, beautiful couple. Watching James take great care of his pregnant wife during their walks in the park, passers-by could barely hold back their tears. In conclusion, it's worth saying that the story of James and Chelsea is a vivid example of the fact that true feelings in love will always prevail over any difficulties that may arise on their way to family happiness.